Tonight, the Prime Minister is finally on his way, flying to the US for his crucial crunch meeting with Donald Trump. Keir Starmer wants to be a bridge between the UK and Europe, but it doesn't sound like it's going to be easy. Well, the US President has tonight been claiming he wants Europe to be making security guarantees for Ukraine, not the US. While in Ukraine, Zelensky signals he's close to signing a deal with the US on minerals, but what he's got in return is less clear. Mervyn King, the former governor of the Bank of England, will be joining us live. When every politician in Europe seems to be agreeing the world has changed, I'll be asking where it all leaves the UK economically. Plus, Rory Stewart, the former Conservative minister, will also be joining us live. He's now a professor in the US. How does he think Starmer should approach Trump tomorrow? And ahead of the pair facing off, we'll be comparing their CVs with a special game of Top Starmer Trumps. All that and more with our top pair tonight, Mercy Muriki and Ben Bradshaw, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Wednesday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. First came the bombshells. Donald Trump opening peace negotiations with Russia, telling Europe they can no longer rely on US military support. And then came the deals over minerals in Ukraine, security guarantees to keep the peace, and of course that commitment from the UK to increase defence spending. All very useful backdrop to Keir Starmer's trip to meet Donald Trump. He's in the air right now. He's flying to Washington for probably one of the most important meetings of his premiership. But I've been really struck today about how there have been a lot of headlines this week, but no detail. Take the minerals deal. So we know that President Zelensky is about to sign some kind of investment deal to allow America access to Ukraine's minerals and natural resources.
Zelensky is going to be coming on Friday. That's now confirmed, and we're going to be signing an agreement, which will be a very big agreement.
A very big agreement, but we've got no idea what the terms are, what the US is getting from it, what security guarantees have been given to Ukraine in return. Who knows? And that's not the only thing there's confusion over. European countries, including the UK and France, have agreed to take part in a peacekeeping force in Ukraine, box ticked. But we don't know what those troops will be doing, whether there'll be US support, and Russia has also thrown a total curveball into any agreement.
We cannot consider any options of deploying peacekeepers to Ukraine.
So more confusion. And there's even confusion when it comes to Keir Starmer's announcement saying there'll be more defence spending, which sounds pretty simple on paper, but what's it going to be spent on? The PM spokesperson today didn't rule out some of the cash going on the controversial Chagos Islands deal, where the UK will give up sovereignty to Mauritius and then lease back the military base on Diego Garcia. I'll be honest, all the answers we've been given this week have just sparked more questions. Trying to get to the bottom of it all, our political editor Beth Rigby is on the plane with the PM. Before taking off, she managed to send us this update from the runway.
I've been on a number of these visits to the White House with various PMs, but none of them are as significant or as matter as much as this one. Why? Well, quite simply, as Keir Starmer says, everything has changed. The US has been the UK's closest ally for decades, but now it is a much less reliable partner under Donald Trump. Be it on trade or security, Keir Starmer really doesn't know what he's heading into. Let's look at Ukraine quickly. Well, can Starmer get security guarantees for Ukraine from a Donald Trump that appears to be pivoting, more sympathetic to Russia than European allies? And then on trade, this is a president threatening tariffs. That would be really bad for the UK economy. And you know what Keir Starmer needs? Well, he needs growth. So on security and trade, massive arse from Keir Starmer. This is a huge test for him. Can he win?
Well, the PM's due to touch down in the States this evening. We can go to Washington and speak to our US correspondent, David Melvyn. So what's Keir Starmer going to be flying into?
Well, he's certainly not having the red carpet rolled out for him right now on the basis of what we've just heard during President Trump's first cabinet meeting. He said the EU had been formed to undermine the United States. He put that much more colourfully than I have, Sophie. But there is some good news, I suppose, for Keir Starmer, that confirmation of a deal of some sorts, whatever it looks like, between the United States and Ukraine does steady the ground to some extent before his arrival here in Washington. He'll also welcome the fact that President Trump was describing Putin not just as a smart guy, but as a cunning person, and said he too would have to make concessions. But he was not committing the United States to any peacekeeping role in Ukraine post-war. He said that was up to the Europeans because at the end of the day, they bear responsibilities for those who are closest to them. Let's just listen to what he had to say about that.
Well, I'm not going to make security guarantees beyond very much. We're going to have Europe do that because it's in, we're talking about Europe as their next door neighbor. But we're going to make sure everything goes well.
Sophie, picking up, yeah?
David, I was fascinated. Yeah, I am picking up. David, I was fascinated to hear you at the beginning of that answer say that the president had described the EU as set up to undermine the United States. Can you just expand on that a bit?
Yeah, well, he said so much, really, during that press conference prior to the cabinet meeting. We went round the world in 90 minutes, from Europe to the Middle East to Iran to Taiwan. But he didn't have any warm words about the European Union. In fact, he confirmed that he intended to impose tariffs of 25% upon them, particularly in relation to vehicles. So that's certainly not the kind of welcome that Sir Keir Starmer would have been expecting when he arrived in Washington. But if anyone expects to, or even hopes to build a bridge between the EU and the United States, they're going to find that a challenging exercise. All you have to do is look at the cabinet meeting we've witnessed, the first since he came back into the White House. One by one, members of the cabinet around the table lined up to effectively laud the President of the United States, and yet the first person invited to address the room was not a member of the cabinet, but Elon Musk, who defended the drastic cuts he's brought in his role as head of the so-called Department of Government Efficiency. Most notably, I think of all, though, when one reporter asked President Trump, did all of the people around the room answer to him? He said, yes, they follow orders without exception. Does that sound like a man who's going to be easily influenced, even by the Prime Minister of another nation? He also, of course, was fact-checked in real time earlier this week by the President of another nation, Emmanuel Macron. He repeated his claim today that the European wartime aid had been given as a loan, something, of course, that is completely wrong.
Really interesting stuff. Always good to talk. David Blevins, thank you very much indeed. Right, let's bring in a duo for this evening, shall we? The broadcaster and former government advisor, Mercy Muriki, and the former Labour Cabinet Minister, Sir Ben Bradshaw. Great to have you both here tonight. Ben, how do you think Keir Starmer is going to navigate this meeting?
This is huge, Sophie. I mean, it was William Hague, I think, who's not given to hyperbole, saying this is the most important meeting between a British Prime Minister and an American President since Roosevelt and Churchill in 1941. Wow. And if anything, it's more challenging, because by then the Americans pretty much decided they were going to come into the war and on democracy and on Europe's side. So, dealing with the president as unpredictable and as capricious as Trump, which is just what we've heard from your intro, is really challenging. I think in many ways, Keir is personally suited quite well to this. He's sober, he's not a performative politician. He will be fact-based, but he's got a big job of work to do, both on trying to secure some kind of security backstop guarantee from the Americans for Ukraine, but also trying to protect the UK and our economy from some of the potential damaging impacts from tariffs that could be down the track.
Yeah, this is it. I mean, we've hardly talked about the economic impact of the Trump presidency, but this is also, a really big deal. Do you agree with Ben and how significant this meeting is going to be?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I think we're seeing a Donald Trump that is actually not even like the Donald Trump that we knew before. So there's this added element of unpredictability in a way that we didn't really witness before in his previous presidency. And I do feel that the Prime Minister now almost has to go in with a mindset of he has to kind of do some damage control here, and he has to realise that Donald Trump is the one calling the shots here. Make no mistake about that. Donald Trump is very much calling the shots in this sort of new world order that we're in. And the Prime Minister does have to go in with a mindset of, maybe humbling ourselves a bit, understanding the kind of diminished role we now play on the world stage, and going in with a view to we need to protect British interests, or the Prime Minister has to definitely protect British interests, because Donald Trump has clearly shown himself to be somebody who will decide on a quite drastic course of action and will pursue that course of action, whether it is with tariffs, whether it is trying to strong-arm various world leaders into doing what he wants. So I think Keir Starmer's got a tough job.
I mean, they wouldn't say it like this, but the announcement on defence spending was clearly timed, so it was ahead of the Donald Trump visit, because we've already seen the kind of positive reaction from the United States. But what was your take on that? Was that the right call to cut aid?
Absolutely.
To fund defence?
I mean, it's horrible for a Labour government to have to do that, but you have to ask critics of that, well, what was the alternative? We had to do something on defence spending. We had to do it anyway, regardless of Donald Trump. And in a way, one of the positives, and I'm constantly kind of seeking for silver linings at the moment in the context of global security, is that Trump is forcing Europe to take more responsibility for our own security. We should have been doing this for a long time. We should have certainly been doing it since Putin invaded Ukraine and upped Russian defence spending. But there's an argument that we should be doing it for longer than that we're still dependent on American security so long after the end of the Second World War. So that's been a wake-up call to Europe. So it was inevitable. It had been discussed for some time, and it's really tough, the decision that he had to take, and it's not in tune with what Labour would normally want to do. But I thought it sent out the message that we are going to have to move from a soft power economy to a hard power economy, given the global context of both Trump and Putin.
How do you think Donald Trump's done so far, Mercy?
Well, I think that the people who voted for Donald Trump are probably really pleased right now, actually, because he is doing what he said he would do, whether you agree with him or not, whether you like him or not. And I think we can all agree he's a bit of a ridiculous character, and that's whether you like him or not. He is a ridiculous political figure. But the people of America did vote him in, and he's not surprising anybody in sort of the path that he's pursuing. And so I think if we're going to measure Donald Trump by the standards of, is he a man of who is doing what he promised the people he would do, and they voted him in to do it, then he's probably doing a good job for them.
I think there's just one thing to add to that, which is the economic impact of his policies, whether they'll be negative or not. And there are already signs that things aren't going quite as smoothly on the economic front in America as he might have hoped.
Yeah, voters never like inflation, do they?
No.
Really good to hear from you both. Lots more from both of you throughout the programme. You're watching the Politics Hub, coming up. Plenty to be discussed between the PM and the President that could impact the government's growth ambitions. I'll be speaking to the former Bank of England Governor, Lord Mervyn King. That's next.
First Minister, how are you?
Good morning. Good morning. Very
Nice
much,
to see you. How are you feeling?
Looking forward to getting into the parliamentary chamber.
Are you any further forward to making a decision?
No, it's an important day today.
All of the claims were in line with my parliamentary duties, so I'm making that clear to you, Conor.
He was a Scot through and through.
He was a very good politician.
Alex Salmond was controversial, he was a disruptor, but above all, he was respected.
Will you resign if you lose this week?
Again, I'm not planning to, of course, lose the vote of no confidence. I'm planning to win that vote of no confidence.
His face said it all.
My intention to stand down as party leader.
This is now a storm with deadly consequences.
How are they feeling?
They're a bit scared at the minute.
We've been told to evacuate.
How are you feeling?
Devastated.
Hundreds of homes were wiped out by flooding. I'm Conor Gillis, Sky's Scotland correspondent.
It was probably the darkest time in my life.
Scott is 5 years sober after a cocaine addiction left him close to death. Scotland has a shameful record, worse than England, the worst in Europe.
Why not just say you've failed? Because then you might get more respect from families who've lost loved ones.
This is where one of the UK's most prolific rapists thought he'd got away with murder. Sky News can reveal that former sex workers had told police he was sexually violent.
My Emma.
Free wherever you get your news. It's over, isn't it? The Americans say he is Rossi, a fraudster. This has been one of the most bizarre cases ever heard in a courtroom in this country. A dangerous murderer.
Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive Andrew Ennis after this?
She said she can forgive him, but as long as he's behind bars.
By doing the right thing, it's destroyed your life.
They terrorised me. They intimidated me.
Sky News. The full story first.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Hello, welcome back. Well, the PM is on the way to meet Donald Trump for those talks on Ukraine, European defence and, of course, those tariffs that the US president has been threatening. And Rachel Reeves with all of this to consider as she mulls over her spring statement, due to be delivered in exactly a month's time. We've already seen a rebalancing of the finances this week to reflect the increasing insecurity of the world, with a cut to aid and to direct funding to the military budget. With us now, I'm pleased to say, is the former Governor of the Bank of England, Lord Mervyn King. Great to have you on the programme.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for being here. We've been talking an awful lot on the programme tonight about what Donald Trump's presidency is going to mean for security. But what do you think it's going to mean for the economy?
Well, as you said at the top of the show, a lot of headlines, a lot of statements, but no detail. And the economic impact will depend on the detail. He introduced tariffs in his first term. Joe Biden added to those tariffs. Now, tariffs that he's introduced so far are far less than we might have expected. So I just think it's impossible. He's very unpredictable, and we just need to just keep calm and not say this is the end of the world and see what he actually does. He is not going to want to do things which will damage his own economy, and to create a trade war would do that.
That's interesting. I mean, he's been talking a bit tonight about the EU and potential tariffs on the EU. I mean, if that happens, I know it isn't if, but that would impact Britain as well, wouldn't it?
But it depends what he does and what he says. I mean, it's impossible to know at this stage. But I think the statement that the EU was created in order to combat the US was just one of those things that it says off the wall. It doesn't mean anything very much, and it's certainly not true. But what he will actually do is what matters, and I think we need to sort of just keep calm and not get too irked. He enjoys stirring things up and making people annoyed, and we shouldn't fall prey to that.
It's a good lesson for journalists as well as politicians, probably, actually, to be fair. There's been a bit of a talk about a possible UK-US trade deal. Do you think that's likely or something that would be desirable?
Well, it would be desirable, but I think it would be difficult to bring about in the short run. It will involve congresses. It has to do that. So, again, the words that the president uses may not mean very much in practice.
Let's talk about the UK. It's a month until the spring statement. What do you think Rachel Reeves needs to do?
Well, I think we should start by recognising the very difficult position that she's inherited. Slow growth for 15 years, budget deficit, large, around 5% of GDP, total national debt, 100% of GDP, interest rates rising. We are leaving to our children and grandchildren a very large amount of debt to service. But I think when you're facing a very difficult position, it pays to be bold and ambitious. And I don't think the government have been either in their approach so far. So let me start by saying what she should not do. Every 6 months, the Office for Budget Responsibility, the OBR, publishes a forecast, and people take one number out of it, which is how much spending has to be cut in order to meet the fiscal rule 5 years down the road. She should not pay much attention to that as a number, because the idea that there's some fixed amount of spending that has to be cut this year, 6 months' time, it may be, we cut too much, and you zigzag around. What she's got to do, I think, is to come up with a genuine narrative for the path of government spending right through this Parliament and explain why that's the amount we have to spend. And the main difficulty in doing that at present is that we don't have, say, a defence review yet to tell us how much to spend on defence. These figures as a percent of GDP are inevitably arbitrary. We need to know how much we ought to spend to restore and expand our defence capabilities. The same is true for the NHS. We don't have any coherent statement of reform to the NHS. Social care, that's been postponed to 2028. That makes no sense whatsoever. Higher education, we need a plan for how much we want to spend on it and how we need to reform it. Councils are short of money. How are we going to deal with that? These things have to, the amount we spend on it has to come out of a clear vision for what we want to do over the next 4 to 5 years. And she shouldn't just cut or change public spending in response to the latest OBR forecast. So stick to that medium-term path. But I think the narrative also has to recognise that it's very hard to imagine that we could really increase credibly our defence spending to where it needs to be and to carry out reforms, which may need some money to oil the wheels of reform, without raising taxes. Now, I don't think she should do it in the next year. I think it would be sensible to allow borrowing to go up for about a year. But then after that, the story has to be, if we as a generation, and the Prime Minister talked about this being a generational issue, have to spend more both on defence and on reforming the public services, we can't do it without raising taxes. And the obvious tax to raise is the basic rate of income tax. We will all contribute to it.
I'm interested there about what you say on taxes, because obviously at the last budget, she got a lot of heat for increasing the employers' national insurance contributions. Do you think she effectively raised the wrong tax there?
Yes, I think it would have been better to have said in the budget, look, the previous government was irresponsible in cutting employees' national insurance contributions. But let's be frank, we were pretty irresponsible in saying we wouldn't reverse it.
So that was the problem. She boxed herself in during the election campaign, you think?
But, I mean, I think it is possible now to say to people, maybe we said some silly things before the election. This is the situation Britain finds itself in. This is what we have to do over the next 4 to 5 years. I think people want politicians to be honest and give them a plan and then say, if that means we have to break what we said in terms of raising employees' national insurance contributions, which would enable them to cut back again the employers' national insurance contributions, which is affecting unexpected areas like charities and so on. But in the long run, to raise enough money, I think we will have to raise the basic rate of income tax. And I see no harm in doing that, provided, and this is the clear condition on it, it's being used to finance a well-thought-through programme of spending and reform. So
the reform first, otherwise you're just shoveling in the money that would be wasted.
First, and then slowly raise the tax to finance it.
You did also say that you think she should increase borrowing in the short term.
If that's needed in order to finance high defence spending.
Would that break her fiscal rules then, is that?
Well, the fiscal rule ought to, I think, to be defined in terms of saying, do we think it is more likely than not that 5 years from now, the ratio of national debt to national income will be able to fall? And the forecasts are never precise, so we don't know that. We can make judgments about, is it more likely than not? But that still would enable her to say, if we have to spend more now, and we don't want to depress the economy in the next 12 months, we may have to borrow more in the next year. But in the rest of the Parliament, we're going to find a way in which, through raising taxes, cutting out waste, we will then be able to reach that target to bring down the amount of debt that we've got to leave to our children and grandchildren. But it does, I think a special unit to tackle waste in government spending would be a good idea, because at present you see this battle between the Treasury and then cabinet ministers defending their departmental spending limits. You don't discover where waste is through that sort of battle. And we need something, we don't want the Elon Musk approach of saying to people, please write to us and tell us what you did last week.
5 things you achieved.
And if you haven't replied to us by Monday night, you're gone. That's not the way to achieve and find waste. The people working at lower levels know where the waste is. We should be involving them, not trying to do it between the Chancellor and Cabinet Ministers.
You were Rachel Reeves's boss when she worked at the Bank of England. What's she like?
She's very tough. She's very tough. I think she hasn't had the experience of economic policy, inevitably. No one in the new government had any of that. And that's, I think, you know, the mistakes that have been made partly through presentation, through not being willing to come up with an overall plan for the whole Parliament in terms of public spending, what that means for taxes. And if that means having to do unpleasant things, difficult things, I'm sure she's tough enough to do it. But it does require the Prime Minister also to go along with the idea that they're going to have to say some of the things that we said we would do no longer make sense.
When you say she was very tough, what do you mean?
Well, she was self-confident. She did not feel that she should, you know, bow down to those of us at the top of the bank.
Like you.
Like me. You know, I have no doubt at all that she's got the resilience and the toughness to stick to what she thinks is right. The crucial thing is that she's got to get that view right first. And that means not just doing what the Treasury suggests that she might do, but actually having a clear plan in which all the things she wants to do come in together into one budget for the whole Parliament. Just
finally, there has been a bit of, I guess, suggestion that she inflated her CV at certain points. She's been dubbed Rachel from accounts by some of her rivals. Do you think it's a bit sexist, some of the criticism?
Well, they've also seemed to have tapped men who've done the same thing. I just think this is all somehow, you know, not what the people of this country want to hear about. I think we'll have enough problems as it is without worrying about, you know, she's not applying for a job now, so this CV seems to me pretty irrelevant. What we want to do is to have someone who's going to talk to us frankly and openly, because I do think that people will accept difficult news if they feel it's genuinely presented to them as a statement of the real problems facing the country, and not just another political statement trying to get good headlines tomorrow morning.
Voters are smarter than politicians give them credit for, right? They understand.
They are. No, I think this was... I would say absolutely my experience has been that voters are a lot more intelligent and thoughtful than most politicians give them credit for.
I agree with you. Thank you very much indeed. It was great to have you on the programme.
Thank you.
Well, of course, the war in Ukraine, defence spending and the pressure on the nation's finances that we've just been speaking about could all feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the broadcaster and commentator Alex Andreu and the Daily Telegraph Deputy Comment Editor Annabel Denham. Right, let's bring in our duo, shall we? Mercy and Ben. I thought that was a fascinating interview, I have to say. Is obviously something that he's been thinking about for a long time, and it's, I guess, it read to me like a bit of a rallying cry, really, to Rachel Reeves. What did you make, Mercy, of his point there that, you know what, voters should just pay a bit more tax, and if you explain to them what the reforms are, then they'll accept it?
I don't think voters need an explanation about the economic state of the country. I think if there's anybody who's feeling the dire economic state of affairs at the moment, it is the average man and woman on the street. They know they're struggling to pay their fuel bills, their gas and electric. They know they're struggling to make ends meet at the end of the month. And so I think the people at the bottom are very much feeling it more than anybody else. However, I do think we have to balance things out, because I don't think it's as simple as saying, oh, well, in that case, instead of sort of raising the basic rate of tax, let's just tax people in the higher rate, for example, because we've seen figures to show that the wealthy are fleeing the country, basically. There is an exodus at the moment. And I think it's worth remembering that the top 1% of earners pay 30% contribute 30% of tax, top 10% contribute 60%. So it's a really delicate balance between not punishing people at the bottom, but not alienating the people who we actually desperately need to contribute tax to this country.
Ben, what did you make of what Mervyn was saying there?
I thought it was fascinating. I agreed with almost every word, but it was a central banker, economist's view, not a politician's view. And the political context of the last election was that Labour couldn't go into the last election promising to put people's taxes up, just given the cost of living crisis. Where I think he was right is I think the security context now with Trump does provide more political space for the government to say, look, we need to increase defence spending. How are we going to do that? OK, we'll rob the aid budget the first time, but it's going to have to go up to 3% as well in the next Parliament. I would very much like to have heard his view on war bonds and this idea of European war bonds to help fund the peace deal if we get one in Ukraine. But I think that he was right in that could provide the government with a political space to do something that they don't want to do, and they said they wouldn't do in the general election campaign.
Matthew, what did you make of what he was saying about how the government needs to set up more of a story and be more bold and ambitious on reform?
I think the government are in a tricky position, and they have already kind of started, rowing back on things they said in their manifesto. And actually, I think what that proves is that governing is an incredibly difficult job, and you do have to be very pragmatic. Every government has to be pragmatic, and I think the British people would expect nothing less. However, I do think the government has been guilty of selling quite a negative story so far of where the country is going, what the state of the economy is going to be like over the course of the Parliament. And so I would very much welcome some longer-term thinking, especially about how we're going to tackle the levels of economic inactivity. We really need to get people back to work. I think really that is what the government should be focusing on.
And I think you'll get that in the comprehensive spending review, and that's what it was always going to be about, and that's what it will be about.
Well, we'll have to wait and see, won't we? And thanks both. Really interesting to get your reflections on that. Coming up next on the Politics Hub, I'll be speaking to the former International Development Secretary, Rory Stewart, all about the delicacy of diplomacy. Welcome back. Now, if you're a fan of the Rest of Politics podcast, you'll recognise our next guest. The former International Development Secretary and former Conservative MP, Rory Stewart, is someone who knows all about the delicacy of international diplomacy. And he joins us now from Connecticut, from where he lectures at Yale University. Good to have you on the programme, Rory. So you're out in the States. Keir Starmer's is on his way out to the US as well for that all-important meeting with Donald Trump. How do you think he should navigate it?
Well, I think the first thing is that Keir Starmer has to try, but the odds are really against him because the basic truth is that Donald Trump has said all the way through the election campaign and said to his voters and said to Putin that he wants to bring an end to the war. And the quickest way of bringing an end to a war is to give Russia all at once. So if you say, let's just think about the deal, if you say Russia gets to keep all the territory that it's currently captured and you're going to lift all the sanctions and you're going to make sure that Ukraine gets no guarantees of security, Putin would probably accept that and Trump would feel that he's got his peace. The problem is that you then hang Ukraine out to dry because it means Ukraine will then be very vulnerable to a Russian invasion in the future, to huge amounts of Russian pressure, probably lead to Zelensky being toppled, and so would other European states. Lithuania would start worrying, Moldova would start worrying.
So do you see this as appeasement by the American president?
Yeah, I mean, people say, he's a master of the deal. But what I've just described, which is giving Vladimir Putin all he wants, is not called a deal. There's another word for it. It's called surrender.
You think it would be a surrender if we take Donald Trump at his word now?
If we can take him at his word. I mean, part of the problem is that the first thing, if I was Keir Starmer, I'm not Keir Starmer, but if I was maybe a diplomat advising Keir Starmer going into that meeting, the first thing that you want to try to achieve is to find out what Trump's plan really is. What has he actually promised Putin? He had an hour and a half on the phone with Putin. We don't know what he talked about. So let's try to get the facts because we don't even know what this deal looks like. And then the second thing, most important thing of all, is this question of security guarantees. Because if you're going to divide Ukraine in two, the most important thing is that Western Ukraine, the bit that remains free of Russia, has proper guarantees. And we've talked about putting British and French support behind, but there also needs to be US support. That's not particularly about the money. It's about all these US capacities for air surveillance, for satellites, for anti-aircraft missiles. And that stuff, at the moment, we don't have the European capacity on. We'd have to buy it from the US, we'd have to borrow it from the US, and that would probably be true for the next 2-3 years.
I mean, we have committed, obviously, to increase UK defence spending. Keir Starmer coming out this week to say that he's going to increase defence spending and he's going to cut the aid budget in order to do it. Is that a decision that you support?
No, it's a terrible, terrible decision. It's a very stupid decision because defence only makes sense if you connect it to your development budget and your diplomacy. The point about the development and diplomacy is that it's doing all the things that makes war less likely. The stupidest thing you can do is put all your money into building up your munition supplies, and you're not doing anything around the world to stop the conflict happening in the first place. And that development assistance was one of the last things holding international development together after the US suddenly decided to remove $45,000 million of US aid a year, which has just happened. So very, very foolish. And this goes back to mistakes before the election, which is that the Labour government insisted on ruling out increasing taxes. What they should have said is, look, I'm sorry, we're in a national security emergency now, and we're going to have to rethink our promises on income tax, VAT, and corporation tax. But funding it by shutting down international development is a terrible thing to do. It's strategically inept.
I mean, we just heard from our last guest, Lord Mervyn King, former governor at the Bank of England, that he thinks there should be a rise in income tax. Do you think that there should be then to fund defence spending?
Yes, I mean, Mervyn King has put his finger on something that's fundamental. The 70% of all the taxes we get in this country come from income tax, corporation tax, VAT, and some national insurance. And by ruling those things out, the Labour Party decided to focus on the worst kind of tax they could possibly rise, which was employers' national insurance. They're not doing it because it's a sensible tax to raise. It's not a sensible way of funding anything. They're doing it because they tied themselves in knots with unrealistic manifesto commitments. And we need to get back to honesty. and do the thing that is in the national interest. And what's in the national interest is funding defense properly, funding public services properly, and unfortunately doing that by a tax rise, and a tax rise for the broadest base, those 70% of taxes that provide the income for the country.
There's one other thing I did want to ask you about, because you got in a bit of a spat on X or Twitter with the US Vice President J.D. Vance recently. I'm sure you remember it. And he said that you believe you've got an IQ of 130 when it's really 110. And then he said this false arrogance drives so much elite failure over the last 40 years. What's your sort of reaction to the little spat you had?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's very weird. You know, I've now been attacked in the last 2 weeks directly by J.D. Vance, by Donald J. Trump Jr., and by Elon Musk. And when you're attacked by those people, you get 10 or 15 million views on these attacks and thousands of people piling in. So it's exposed to me just how many people there are out there in the world that strongly agree with J.D. Vance. But there's a bigger point, which is this is a very, very disturbing development in American politics. Look, like me or hate me, and I may be the stupidest person in the world, but there's got to be better things for the US vice president to be doing than attacking me. There's got to be better things for Elon Musk to be doing than trying to undermine the German government in the middle of an election by supporting far-right parties. This US administration is using social media now in exactly the way that Vladimir Putin uses social media, which is to try to undermine liberal democracy from within. And I don't want to put myself on a pedestal, but clearly I have become, in the eyes of some of these people in the US, an enemy because I am trying to assert what used to be the values that we've shared with the United States for the last 80 years, and which are now apparently all hypocritical, globalist, elite nonsense. And those values include international development assistance and why actually it's a good idea and a decent thing to help some of the poorest people in the world. It doesn't take a huge amount of our money, but it's a decent thing. But it's also in our interest, because if we were not supporting the extreme poor in Jordan and in Lebanon when they fled from Syria, they would have come to Europe. It's a good way of protecting ourselves from pandemics. It's also not a very good idea for the US government to treat their allies, to treat Canada, Denmark, Germany as their enemies, and to treat people like Russia as their friends, because Russia is not your friend. And this is leading to a very horrible world where I literally cannot see, with what J.D. Vance is tweeting and what Elon Musk is doing and what Donald Trump is doing, I cannot imagine how Vladimir Putin or the Russian intelligence service could have come up with a better plan for destroying America and the Western alliance.
I'm just quite struck when you're talking about J.D. Vance and the US president. You know, you used to be a Conservative MP, right, which feels like a long sort of time ago. But, you know, if you look at the right, whether in the UK or in America or around the world, it feels like it's a very different political vision to the one that you had in the Conservative Party. Do you think the politics of the right has really transformed in the last few years?
Yeah, it's completely transformed. It's very, very strange. I think there's a huge space for a moderate conservative position in our politics. I mean, what does being a conservative mean? It means respecting the Constitution, loving your country, believing in tradition, being prudent abroad, restrained at home, belief in markets and the power of markets, belief in freedom, but it also is a belief in allies. And there is a gaping hole. Look, if the Conservative Party came to its senses and found a leader who could actually say, the problem with the Labour Party at the moment is not culture wars, it's not transgender bathrooms, it's not whatever's obsessing Vance and Musk. The problem with the Labour Party is they're not being bold enough. They're not sorting out the economy in the way they should. They're not making the right decisions on taxes. They're not seizing the opportunity to rebuild an international security architecture in NATO and Europe to replace the United States. They're not rising to the challenges of the century. And you could beat them. You could win this election in the center ground. And it's such a bad mistake for conservatives all around the world to think that what they need to do is chase the far right and go down these weird rabbit holes appealing to and feeding extremist opinion, when what people actually care about is getting the economy going, sorting out costs of living, keeping ourselves safe, and getting the right combination of dynamism and practicality. And I don't know what's happening. It's really, really sad. But Britain needs to come to its senses.
I guess just to put the counterpoint to that, you talk there about how people want politicians to sort out the economy and the security and all those things. Do you think people feel that the centre of politics has failed to do that? It's failed them. It hasn't made their lives better. It hasn't listened to them. It shut down their opinions. And that is why they've lost trust in the elite, an elite that many feel that you had been a part of as well.
Yes, of course. A very big part of this narrative is that. And the 2008 financial crisis was devastating. And there were many other things that our governments got wrong. Iraq and Afghanistan were humiliating $3 trillion messes. So there's every reason for the public to be very skeptical of politicians. But identifying the problem, right, which is that people made a lot of mistakes in the past, does not mean the answer to that is to bring in reckless populist isolationism, tearing up international aid budgets, tearing up alliances, tearing up government departments, believing that you can somehow run a government as though it's some Silicon Valley startup. You start behaving like that, you're going to do untold damage to the world. Because the center ground isn't just about the mistakes that have been made in the last 15 years. It stands for other things. It stands for democracy. It stands for persuasion. It stands for compromise. It stands for listening to people. It stands for admitting when we're wrong. I mean, one of the differences between people in the center is that I am prepared to say that I've got a lot of things wrong and I learn from my mistakes and I try to focus on the truth and I try to do better in the future. But if the alternative to that is some Donald Trump post showing an ethnically cleansed Gaza with him as a gold statue like a Turkmen dictator lying on a sunbed with Benjamin Netanyahu when 40,000 people have been killed in Gaza, the solution that people are producing is so much more dangerous and terrifying than any of the problems that were created by the liberal center. And the solution is to be more dynamic in the center, not to chase fantasies on the right.
Rory, it's been fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on the Politics Hub and giving us your perspective today. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Right, let's chat to Mercy and Ben, shall we? And Ben, what do you make of...
I'm full of admiration. He's still on X, actually, battling it out with the Trump government. Yeah. I came off X after the Hitler salutes, and it may be better for his mental health if he came off it as well and just focused on Blue Sky and his good work as an academic. Look, again, the only thing I'd take issue was what he said about tax, which is that we weren't in a global security emergency when Labour was elected and drawing up a manifesto, because we still had democratic government in the United States and we still had Biden in the White House. But I think he's right, in the same way that Mervyn King was right, is that the new context could provide the space for the government to be a bit more ambitious on those fronts.
What do you make of what he was saying about the centre ground?
I think he's right to an extent that, I mean, the centre ground has... The publics in Western democracies have got used, mainly since the Second World War, to ever improving living standards and quality of life. That has stalled in the last... for me, it's an economic problem. The problem, it's not a cultural problem, it's an economic problem about failing to deliver, failing to ensure that people feel that their children and their grandchildren are going to have a better life than they did. That's the challenge facing the centre. I don't think the populist right or left can deliver on those either. And in a way, the Trump experiment is going to be very interesting on that front. An awful lot of damage potentially done in the meantime. But I like Rory, I haven't given up hope for the centre to come back and deliver. And actually, in many of those European countries where the populist right has got into power, it hasn't been successful. In Poland, for example, we've come back to the centre. So I still hope and believe that we can deliver and find the answers to the future. And I certainly don't think you will find those answers from a populist on either the extreme right or left.
Mercy, I'm interested to get your perspective on Rory Stewart.
Well, I think he said something really important now, which is that it's about democracy and persuasion, and those are the fundamental values that we need to get out of this mess that we found ourselves in global politics. But the reality is that the centre has not persuaded people. The left hasn't either. It hasn't persuaded people that it can make their lives better. And actually, we have democracy, and democratic nations all over Europe and across America are voting in right-wing governments. So actually, this is very much democracy at play. And so I think sometimes people on the centre, and I would actually include myself in that. I am a moderate, I'm on the right, but I am a moderate, and I do want to see a return to the centre ground. But there has to be an acknowledgement that actually people are legitimate in feeling the things they feel that lead them to, you know, being attracted to these populist right-wing parties. And I think people in the political elites have had this tendency to kind of treat voters with contempt and treat them as absurd for voting for these populist parties without actually properly engaging with the reasons that they're doing that. And I still haven't really seen, certainly on the left, I haven't seen them engaging properly with why people feel that they can abandon the left and go to, you know, all the way to the right. That needs to be something that parties, and particularly parties who consider themselves as moderates, as in the centre, we need to properly grapple with that and give people answers that people think that the right-wing populist parties are giving them. We need to have answers that are better than those answers that the populist parties are.
What would you say, Tom?
I think that, we did win the election last year, albeit on a relatively low share of the vote. We won a landslide. And I think one of the reasons we did that is we did, unlike the Democrats in the United States, we were responding to people's concerns, both on the cost of living and on immigration.
Reform are doing better than Labour and the Conservatives in the polls, so it's...
Yeah, but, you know, let's wait and see what happens. I mean, we're, what, 9 months into a new government with a lot of headwinds, and I think the judgment on the Labour government here will be made at the next election. And I think Keir and his team are absolutely clear that they've got to deliver. They've got to deliver, and particularly they've got to deliver on living standards so that people feel better off at the end of this parliament than they did at the beginning. And that is key, and that's key for all democracies. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the problems that the Democrats had, in a way, were that kind of treating voters with the contempt, not understanding the strength of their feeling. I think we were very conscious of that, and I think that's one of the reasons we won and they didn't.
Really interesting. Thanks both for giving us your perspective on that. Still to come on the Politics Hub. It's Starmer versus Trump. We're going to be taking a closer look at how the leaders compare and ask ahead of their White House meeting, do they have that much in common?
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, the deepening post office IT scandal that's not about the Horizon system. Sky News has learned that a number of convictions relating to the system before Horizon, called Capture, are now being examined as potential miscarriages of justice. And we'll have the latest from North Yorkshire tonight, where human remains have been found in the search for a woman murdered by her husband 12 years ago. All that and much more on the UK Tonight from 8.
Trust in politics is at an all-time low. What's going wrong and can we fix it? It's from Liz. She wants to know, why is there still no sign of the Labour Party electing a woman as leader?
It's sort of embarrassing. You know, it takes a very strong man to be leader, but it takes an even stronger man to support a woman for leader.
If you want to be mean to politicians, like, crack on. The activists that go out and make elections happen, I kind of feel like just don't be horrible to them. Be polite to them in the same way that they're polite to you.
Keir Starmer has got us into government with a big majority. He was completely clear before the election that he wasn't going to be able to do the two-child benefit policy, but I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't an early thing that comes along.
I went up to Gordon Brown and said, hello? No, yes, where is it? I said, found all these Tory candidates breaking land. Let me see it. This is brilliant.
You are on Sky News. Welcome to the BAFTAs.
I'm Katie Spencer, Sky's arts and entertainment correspondent. And from the BAFTAs to the Brit Awards, the Oscars to the Olivier's, our entertainment team is here interviewing some of the biggest stars in the world.
This is the story of the night. It's the little independent film that could.
Sky News, the full story first, free wherever you get your news.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We start with breaking news.
I am Anna Botting.
It's been quite some day.
The golden age of America begins right now.
A long
long-awaited ceasefire is now underway.
First question, Sky News.
Congratulations, this is a huge moment.
Describe this feeling. It's incredible.
Now to California.
The Democratic mayor of Los Angeles cut the fire department budget.
Do you owe citizens an apology? Have you nothing to say today?
Jane Secker, Sky News. Would you like to respond to us now?
I've never seen anything like this.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
In principle, would you agree to do that?
Criticism of you, the president, is banned. How is this a fair election?
Historic day here today.
The cameras are poised here, there, everywhere, waiting to see what the president might do next.
I gave you the A+ treatment. Thank you. Thank you all.
Top Trump's time.
Welcome back. Now, there is much to be discussed between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump at the White House meeting tomorrow. But as well as the content, there is, of course, the game of politics to be played. And the pair haven't exactly always had the same approach to diplomacy. Despite the ever-invoked historical special relationship, they really are pretty different men. So we thought we would explore that with, bear with us, a game of top trumps based on the two leaders to see how they compare and to really show. The idea of this is to show how different they are. Ben's really excited about this. He's never played top trumps before. He's got no idea what's going on. It's going to be fine. Right. So basically, we've got Keir Starmer's corner here, which is Mercy and Ben, versus me. I've got Donald Trump for top trumps. And since you're the guests, would you like to go first?
Days in office.
Oh, well, you know that Donald Trump has had 2 presidencies added together.
Oh, that's cheating.
So actually, it's quite a lot. I've got 1,499.
Oh, well, we've got 236.
Yes. I'm going to go next. I'm going to go spouses.
1.
Well, that's a positive.
I've got 3. You're right, I should probably...
You lose that.
I know, I'm not sure having multiple marriages should actually be points in the bank, but I feel like this is how top trumps work.
Forget Donald Trump has had 3.
Yeah, it's quite a few.
Yeah. Pets.
Yeah, no pets. No pets.
Well, we've got 3 cats. Well, Keir Starmer has 3 cats.
Oh, yeah,
I do have 4 cats, though, personally.
Oh, do you? There you go.
Yeah.
You're a cat fan like Keir Starmer. Okay,
yeah.
that's definitely a point for Keir Starmer. 3 cats in Downing Street. Love it.
Wow.
Absolutely love it. Right, I'm going to go approval rating.
26%.
Oh, 44% for Donald Trump. It's quite high for Donald Trump, isn't it?
Yeah.
But like you say, I guess it's all going to be dependent on what happens to the economy, right?
Yeah.
That's what you've been saying throughout. Right, last one, go for it.
Age. I know you're going to win that, but I would argue that youth is a benefit as well as having not lots of marriages.
I know you're making very fair points here. You're making very fair points.
62.
78.
I think Keir's a youthful spring chicken, isn't he?
He is a youthful spring chicken. I love it. But I mean, I guess the wider thing here is a demonstration for how different the 2 men is. Remind me never to play top trumps on the programme again. But thanks for bearing with us tonight. Great to see you both. I'll see you tomorrow.